You know, there's a specific sound that a digital electric meter makes when it's under a heavy load, a sort of high-pitched electronic whine that most people never hear because they aren't standing next to it when their entire house is lit up like a Christmas tree. But the second I stepped out of my truck that Friday afternoon, the air around my cabin wasn't filled with the chirping of crickets or the rustle of wind through the hemlocks. It was vibrating with that whine, a sound that told me my peaceful, off-grid sanctuary was currently pulling enough amperage to run a small factory. I froze right there in the gravel, keys still in my hand, looking at my cabin, my sanctuary, my escape from the city. And it was dark, completely dark, shutters closed, no lights on, no smoke from the chimney. Yet the meter on the side of the house was spinning so fast the numbers were just a gray blur, and that's when I saw it. A bright, neon orange umbilical cord snaking out from under my porch, slithering through the dead leaves and disappearing into the dense rhododendron thicket like it had a mind of its own. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of it, the bushes rustled, branches snapped, and out she came. Brenda, a woman with hair the color of processed cheese, wearing oversized sunglasses that covered half her face even though we were under a dense canopy of trees. And she wasn't startled. She wasn't embarrassed. She just glared at me like I was the one intruding on her personal power plant. And folks, when I tell you that this woman didn't just double down, she tripled down. When I told her to unplug her illegal tap from my home, she didn't apologize. She didn't run. She pulled out her phone and called the cops on me, screaming to the dispatcher that I was stealing community electricity from her. As if the 5 acres I held the deed to were some sort of public utility she had a God-given right to drain dry. I'm getting ahead of myself, though, because to understand how satisfying the end of this mess was, you have to understand what this cabin meant to me. It wasn't just wood and stone. It was 5 years of savings, 5 years of eating ramen and working overtime as a structural engineer so I could buy a slice of silence in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place where the only deadline I had was watching the sun go down. I bought the place as a fixer-upper, a shell really, and I spent every weekend for 6 months rewiring it myself, bringing everything up to code, installing a new heavy-duty breaker box, burying the lines so storms wouldn't take them out. I treated that electrical system like a work of art, because that's what engineers do. We obsess over the infrastructure so we can relax in the safety of it later. Everything was perfect for the first few months. The bills were minimal, just the base connection fee and a few kilowatt hours for the fridge I left running. But then, about 3 months ago, the bills started creeping up, $40 one month, then $80, then $150, and I sat there in my city apartment staring at the paper, trying to rationalize it, thinking maybe the old water heater was failing. Maybe the insulation wasn't holding the heat. Maybe I'd left a baseboard heater on by mistake. I made excuses because I didn't want to believe the alternative. I didn't want to believe that in my slice of heaven, someone was leeching off me. But denial is an expensive luxury. And when the bill hit $300 for a cabin I hadn't visited in 3 weeks, the engineer in me finally shut up, and the angry property owner took the wheel. I drove up there with a multimeter and a bad attitude, determined to find the short circuit. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew copper wires don't just decide to burn $300 of electricity on their own. When I arrived and saw that meter spinning, I didn't storm into the woods right away. That's what an amateur does. And if there's one thing my job taught me, it's that you don't start a demolition until you've surveyed the foundation. So I walked to the breaker box on the side of the house, unlocked it, and flipped the main breaker, killing all power to the interior of the cabin. The cabin went dead silent. The fridge compressor shuddered to a halt. But outside, that meter kept spinning, whining, mocking me. That confirmed it. The tap wasn't inside. It was wired directly into the external GFI outlet I'd installed on the porch for holiday lights. An outlet that was supposed to be weatherproof, not theft-proof. I walked over to the porch, crouched down, and examined the outlet cover. It was pried open, the plastic casing scratched and gouged where someone had forced a heavy-duty plug into it repeatedly, and the ground beneath it was packed hard, the pine needles crushed into a muddy path that led straight off my property line. I could have just unplugged it. I could have cut the cord and left it there as a warning, but you don't fix a structural failure by painting over the crack. You find the source of the stress and you eliminate it. So, I decided to wait. I moved my truck down the road about a quarter mile, tucked it behind an old logging berm, so it wouldn't be visible from the main track, and I hiked back up through the woods, settling into a spot on the ridge overlooking my own driveway, armed with a thermos of black coffee and a pair of binoculars, waiting to see who felt entitled to my hard-earned voltage. It didn't take long. Around 10 a.m., a battered white SUV that sounded like it was coughing up a lung rolled up my driveway, not hesitantly, but with the confidence of someone coming home, and out stepped Brenda. She looked like she was dressed for a brunch that happened 10 years ago, wearing a floral top and those ridiculous sunglasses, and she walked straight to my porch, popped the trunk of her car, and hauled out this massive, industrial orange extension cord, the kind you see on construction sites, thick as a garden hose. She plugged it in with a practiced motion, gave it a little tug to make sure it was seated, and then started walking the spool back toward the woods. No guilt, no looking over her shoulder, just pure, unadulterated entitlement. I gave her about 5 minutes to get settled, to get whatever appliances she was running fired up, and then I came down from the ridge, moving quiet, letting the anger settle into a cold, hard resolve. I walked up behind her just as she was adjusting the cord near the tree line, and I said, calm as a church deacon, "You know, copper is expensive, but I think the electricity is costing me more." She spun around so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet, clutching her chest, and for a second, just a split second, I saw fear. But then, like a switch flipping, the fear vanished and was replaced by this indignant, self-righteous fury that I honestly didn't expect. "You nearly gave me a heart attack," she screamed, pointing a finger at me like I was the one breaking the law. "You can't just sneak up on people in the woods. It's dangerous." "It's my woods," I said, pointing at the property marker painted on the tree right next to her head. "And that's my electricity you're stealing." "I am not stealing," she yelled, her voice cracking. "I am borrowing. This is a community. We share resources up here. My power was cut off by mistake, a clerical error, and I have food in the fridge that's going to spoil. Do you want me to starve? Is that it? You want a woman to starve because you're too stingy to share a few volts." "A few volts." I laughed, a dry sound that had no humor in it. "Brenda, I assume that's your name, or maybe it's Karen. My bill was $300 last month. You aren't running a fridge, you're running a welder." "My name is Brenda," she shrieked, "and I have rights. Implied easement rights. You're hardly ever here. You absentee landlords come up here, buy up all the land, and leave us locals to rot. Well, I won't stand for it." And that's when she pulled the phone out. I watched, mesmerized by the sheer audacity, as she dialed 911 and started sobbing. Fake, heaving sobs, telling the operator that a strange man was harassing her, threatening her, and trying to cut off her medical equipment power supply. I didn't try to stop her. I didn't try to grab the phone. I just leaned against a tree, crossed my arms, and waited, because I knew something she didn't. I knew Deputy Miller. See, Deputy Miller had pulled me over a few months back for a taillight that was out, and we'd spent 20 minutes talking about truck engines. He was a good guy, a no-nonsense guy, and I knew he covered this sector on Fridays. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, I saw the dust cloud of a cruiser coming up the drive, and Brenda, seeing her audience arrive, threw herself onto the ground near the cord, wailing like she'd been shot. Deputy Miller stepped out of the car, adjusted his belt, and looked from the sobbing woman on the ground to me leaning against the tree, and he didn't look concerned. He looked exhausted. "Caleb," Miller nodded to me, ignoring Brenda for a second. "Fixed that taillight yet?" "Day after you told me, Miller," I said. Brenda stopped crying instantly, realizing she'd made a tactical error. "You know him? This is corruption. He's attacking me. He's cutting my power." Miller looked down at her. "Ma'am, get up off the dirt. Now, whose house is this?" Well, it's his," she stammered, standing up and brushing off her knees. "But I have an agreement. A verbal contract. He said I could use the power whenever I needed it. And now he's reneging because he's a narcissist." "I've never met this woman in my life," I said calmly, reaching into my back pocket and pulling out the stack of bills and the printout of the meter readings I'd prepared. "But based on these usage spikes, she's been stealing from me since October." Miller took the papers, glanced at the numbers, and then looked at the orange cord stretching into the woods. "Ma'am, where does that cord go?" "To my house," she said defiantly. "For my medical equipment." "Medical equipment?" Miller raised an eyebrow. "Okay, let's go see. If it's life-saving equipment, We need to make sure it's secure, right? He started walking down the path, and Brenda panicked, trying to block him, dancing back and forth like a goalie. You can't go down there. That's private property. You need a warrant. Exigent circumstances, Miller said, stepping around her. You claimed a medical emergency on the 911 call. I'm investigating the emergency. We followed the orange snake about 200 yards through the brush, down into a ravine where a single wide trailer sat rotting on cinder blocks, looking like it was held together by moss and bad intentions. The cord ran through a window that was propped open with a stick, and looking inside, folks, it wasn't an iron lung or a dialysis machine. Plugged into a massive power strip were two space heaters glowing red hot, a window AC unit that was duct-taped into the wall and rattling away, a massive flat-screen TV playing a soap opera, and a microwave that looked like it was from the future. That's a lot of medical equipment, Miller drawled, looking at the setup. Looks like you're heating the outdoors and cooling the indoors at the same time. Brenda was sputtering, trying to come up with a lie, but the visual evidence was overwhelming. Ma'am, Miller said, turning to her, his voice dropping that polite veneer. You are under arrest for theft of utilities, trespassing, and filing a false police report. And I suggest you don't resist, because I'm already in a bad mood. They cuffed her right there in the pine needles, and as they walked her back to the cruiser, she wasn't crying anymore. She was screaming threats, telling me she knew people, that her brother Earl was going to come up here and fix my wagon, that I'd regret the day I messed with the locals. I watched the cruiser drive away, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before, and I thought it was over. I thought I'd won. But like I said, you don't fix a structural failure just by patching the crack. I spent the rest of the afternoon securing the place. I cut the orange cord into 3-foot sections and threw them in the trash. I installed a locking steel cover over the outdoor outlet, and I put up 2 trail cameras I'd bought on the way up, hiding them high in the trees where you couldn't see them unless you were looking for them. That night, I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was still humming in my blood, so I sat on the porch with the lights off, just listening to the woods, and around 2 a.m., I heard it. Heavy boots, crunching on gravel, not trying to be quiet. I checked the feed on my phone from the trail cam I'd put near the driveway entrance. A truck had pulled up, a beat-up Ford with a lift kit and a light bar, and a man was standing at the edge of my property, staring at the cabin. He was big, broad-shouldered, wearing a mechanic's jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. This had to be Earl, the brother Brenda had screamed about. He didn't come closer. He just stood there for a solid 10 minutes, smoking a cigarette, the cherry glowing in the dark like a singular, hateful eye, and then he flicked the butt onto my driveway, ground it out with his heel, and left. It was a message. I know you're there. I know where you live. The next morning, I drove down the mountain to meet Silas, an old-timer who lived a few miles down the ridge. Silas was the unofficial historian of the mountain, a man who knew where every property line was and who had buried bodies where. Metaphorically speaking, I hope. You met Brenda, Silas said, pouring me a cup of coffee that tasted like battery acid and molasses. And you met Earl, or at least his truck. She's stealing power, Silas, I said, and the cops took her in. But she's already out. I got a text from an unknown number this morning. Just a picture of my cabin taken from the woods. Silas sighed, leaning back in his rocking chair. That family, they're like kudzu. You cut and back, they grow over something else. Brenda thinks the world owes her a living, and Earl thinks his job is to beat up anyone who disagrees. They've been bullying folks off this ridge for years. Usually some are people who get scared and sell cheap. I'm not selling, I said, and I felt the truth of it in my bones. I put too much into this. Then you better get ready for a siege, Silas warned. Earl isn't smart, but he's mean. He won't come at you head-on while the cops are watching. He'll come at your infrastructure. He'll break what you fixed. Silas was right. When I got back to the cabin, I did a perimeter check, and that's when I found the green cord. Tucked behind the generator shed, completely separate from where Brenda had hooked up, was another extension cord, green this time to blend in with the grass, coiling away toward a different property line. The neighbor to the north, a sweet older couple who only came up for Thanksgiving. Brenda hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been running a web, tapping into multiple empty cabins to spread the load so no single bill would look too suspicious. I was just the first one to catch her because I was the engineer who did the math. But then I saw the damage. The side panel of my breaker box, the one I'd locked, had pry marks on it, deep gouges in the metal where someone had tried to force it open with a crowbar, and sitting in the dirt nearby was a cigarette, but the same brand Earl had been smoking the night before. He wasn't trying to steal power. He was trying to sabotage the system, maybe cut the lines, maybe cause a surge to blow my appliances. It was malicious, petty destruction. I didn't call the cops immediately. I knew they'd need more than a cigarette butt, so I decided to set a trap, an informational one. I went into town, bought a dummy camera, big and obvious, and mounted it right over the breaker box, making sure it was visible from the woods. But the real camera, a high-def night vision unit, I hid inside a birdhouse about 20 feet away, angled to catch the face of anyone messing with the dummy camera. Then I waited. It started raining that evening, a cold, miserable mountain rain that turned the dirt roads to soup, and I sat in the dark cabin, watching the monitors on my laptop. Around midnight, the motion sensor tripped. It wasn't Earl alone this time. It was Brenda and Earl, walking boldly up the driveway. Brenda looking frantic and Earl looking drunk, swaying slightly, holding a crowbar. I could hear them through the camera's microphone, the rain muffling their voices, but not enough to hide the intent. "He's in there," Brenda hissed. "I saw his truck. You gotta scare him, Earl. Break the meter. Make him think it's unsafe. If he leaves, we can hook it back up. I'll break his face," Earl growled, slapping the crowbar against his palm. "Calling the cops on family. Nobody does that." They walked right up to the breaker box, and Earl looked up, saw the dummy camera, and laughed. "Look at this toy," he said, and he swung the crowbar, smashing the plastic casing of the fake camera into 100 pieces. "Now he's blind," Earl grinned. "Time to cut the juice." He jammed the crowbar into the side of the breaker box, leveraging it against the steel, trying to pop the door, and sparks flew. He'd nicked a conduit. That was my cue. I didn't step out with a gun. I didn't step out shouting. I stepped out onto the porch and hit the button on the key fob for the floodlights. 4,000 lumens of LED daylight flooded the yard, blinding them instantly. Earl threw his hands up, dropping the crowbar, stumbling back into the mud, and Brenda shrieked like a banshee, shielding her eyes. "Smile," I said, holding up my phone, which was streaming the feed from the hidden birdhouse camera directly to the cloud. "You're on the hidden camera, Earl. The one you didn't smash. You son of a—" Earl started to lunge, but then a voice boomed from the darkness of the driveway. "Earl, don't you move a muscle, or I'll tase you where you stand." It was Deputy Miller, flanked by another officer. See, I'd called Miller the second I saw them on the monitor, told him there was an intruder with a weapon attempting to sabotage my home, and Miller, bless his heart, had been parked at the bottom of the ridge waiting for an excuse to come back up. Earl froze, the fight draining out of him as he realized he was holding a crowbar standing next to a damaged electrical box in front of two cops. He invited us. Brenda tried, falling back on her only skill, lying. He called us to fix the fuse. Brenda, Miller sighed, walking into the light, water dripping from his hat. "I have the video feed on my dash laptop. Mr. Dalton sent me a link 10 minutes ago. We watched you walk up here. We heard you talk about breaking the meter. We saw Earl smash the camera." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain and Earl's heavy breathing. "That's conspiracy, vandalism, attempted burglary, and possession of burglary tools," Miller listed off, ticking them on his fingers. "And since you're already out on bail, Brenda, I think the judge is going to revoke that faster than you can say extension cord." They cuffed them both, Earl hanging his head like a scolded dog, Brenda sobbing and screaming that it was a setup, that I was the devil, that the mountain would get me eventually. As they loaded them into the cars, Silas walked up the driveway, leaning on his cane, a flashlight in his hand. "Good show," Silas nodded, looking at the flashing lights. "Never liked that boy Earl. Always parked on my grass. You think this is it?" I asked, watching the taillights fade. "You think they're done?" "Oh, they're done," Silas said. "Earl's got priors. A felony vandalism charge violates his parole. He's going away for a while. And Brenda? Without Earl to bully folks, and without free power, she'll have to move. Can't survive a winter up here without juice." Silas was right. It's been 2 months since that night. Earl is currently a guest of the state, serving 18 months for the probation violation and the vandalism. Brenda tried to stay, but when the temperatures dropped and she couldn't steal power from me or the neighbors, who all installed locking covers after I warned them, She packed up her trailer and hauled it down the mountain to some other unsuspecting town. My cabin is quiet now. The meter spins slow and steady, just counting the watts I use. I sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the fireflies, and I feel a peace that's deeper than before because I know I fought for it. Boundaries are funny things. We put them up to keep people out, but really, they define who we are. They say, "This is mine, I worked for it, and I value it enough to defend it." It's tempting to let things slide, to not rock the boat, to let the Brindis of the world take a little bit here and a little bit there, because it's easier than confrontation. But if you give a thief an inch of copper wire, they'll take the whole grid. So, I want to ask you folks watching, have you ever had a neighbor who didn't understand the word no? Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand or the mud to protect what was yours? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me your horror stories. Tell me your victories. And if you're ever in the Blue Ridge Mountains and you see an orange extension cord running into the woods, do yourself a favor. Cut it. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and keep your meters locked.